Hi, it's Paul Bain. It's GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking to dads of all shapes and sizes about what's going on with parenting today and how men are stepping up to be even better dads. And today I've got an interesting guest because it's not an area that I know a lot about. I probably should know a lot more about it, but we're talking today with Christopher Scott Wyatt, who's an expert on neurodivergent children and has a doctorate in instruction on autism spectrum disorder. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much for having me.
So this is an interesting topic. You and I chatted for a second about the fact that neurodivergence obviously has probably existed for forever, but more recently, people are talking about it a lot more than they were, and people are being diagnosed or considered neurodivergent where maybe they previously would have fit into the bell curve, or maybe just weren't. They were just considered problem children or had that type of thing. So what do you know about that evolution of the thinking?
So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Mental Health Professions, the American, it's the American Guidebook for Mental Health, really, the DSM. And the DSM third edition had a very narrow definition of autism and what that was and what neurodivergence was. The fourth edition changed that and had an interesting, we can debate whether it was a typo or an intentional decision, but along with the criteria, instead of a this and this and this, there was an or. Oh. Now, once you say if you are this or this, now you've just doubled your diagnostic criteria. So that happened. They did make some adjustments in the fourth edition TR, which stands for text revision. And then more recently, we have the DSM-5, which is now the gold standard for diagnosing mental health. And that also featured a major revision to both the autism spectrum and fetal alcohol, which went from fetal alcohol disorder to fetal alcohol syndrome. So again, we went from saying you have to have all of these traits to you can have A, B, and part of C, or A, B, and D. So what happened was when they narrowed when it was very narrow in the third edition, very few children were being diagnosed. And as they broadened these diagnostic criteria, we ended up with more and more individuals being diagnosed as neurodivergent. And it wasn't just with autism or fetal alcohol, but the widening definitions also applied to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They brought in PDD-NOS, which was pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, into the autism spectrum. They took PTSD and classified it now as a neurodivergent trait because it does affect the wiring of the brain, especially if it happens at a young age. So more and more things were classified as neurodivergence, meaning that either genetically or environmentally, parts of the brain that help control executive function, in particular the left frontal lobe, the part of the brain that helps you keep track of time and organize your thoughts and control your behaviors. As we started to say, these new traits count as neurodivergent, and the qualifying characteristic was literally a neurological difference. So it's a neurological difference, and within the movement, they will call it neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and then they will talk about other people as being neurotypical. Now, I find that a little problematic because I don't think any two brains any more than any two people can be alike. So I tend to think we're all outside of whatever normal is. Normal's pretty
on
narrow.
The spectrum of some sort, right?
Yeah. So, but that's what happened, and so I am someone who was diagnosed previously with other labels, and those labels changed over time. So by the time I was in my mid to late 30s, what happened with my diagnoses was my diagnoses then shifted into the autism spectrum. Not that I got rid of ADHD, but they moved everything into the autism spectrum. And then both of my daughters are neurodiverse. They both have ADHD. One has the autism diagnosis, and the other has other diagnoses, making her equally complicated.
So what do you think? What do you think is accounted for this change? Do you think there is a change in our brain wiring where this is a more common trait, or that we're better able to now diagnose it and understand it?
I think that looking at the work of Roy Richard Grinker, for example, who wrote the book Nobody's Normal, what happens is society decides what is or isn't a disability. If 50% of people were deaf, which has happened in a particular New England community, the community adapts because of this genetic trait that if half your population has it, you find that sign language works, and suddenly they're not disabled because everyone's accommodating that unique trait. What happens is when your traits come against the norms, now you're disabled because you're different. I mean, hyperactivity, especially hypervigilance, is very practical if you're living on the plains, hunting, trying to avoid being hunted. If you're, in a hunter-gatherer society, ADHD might keep you alive.
Yeah.
But ADHD in a workplace where you're supposed to sit at a desk for 8 hours, now it's a disability.
Right. And I can imagine there are a lot of kids, especially a lot of boys, who are diagnosed with that just out of just normal hyperactivity of young boys. Is that true?
I think that's why we see more boys diagnosed, because in young women, ADHD tends to look like daydreaming. So they're lost in thought. So they're not diagnosed at an appropriate rate. Also, we know that there are diagnostic differences among ethnic groups. So it helps to be a middle-class white boy, then you'll get diagnosed as on the spectrum or with ADHD. They do better screening of learning disabilities with boys. And a lot of that has been attention that has been paid in schools. But what happens is they say, oh, look for someone who's fidgeting, or look for someone who's doing these certain behaviors. Well, they catch the boys then, but they don't catch other people who have the same condition, but it is expressed differently.
Right. So, and for a dad looking at his kids, I think, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I knew parents whose kids were diagnosed with ADHD or not autism, but ADHD, and it was considered like a tragedy. It was like, oh my God, this is something I'm gonna have to deal with. But I think is the feeling like, as you said, hyperactivity in some areas or hypervigilance would be seen as a gift. In a lot of these cases, actually having this way of looking at the world could be considered a somewhat of a superpower because it differs from other people. Is that too generous an idea?
I think we are at a stage now where we're especially younger people are starting to recognize that differences can contribute to a workplace. I think for so long, workplaces were very homogenous, and they were stratified by income, by ethnicity, by other cultural markers. And now we're at the point where we're starting to ask, well, maybe different voices will give us creativity. Do I need that person with ADHD, that autistic person who's good at certain routines? Do I need these differences, not just male, female, not just ethnic differences or cultural differences, but I think some employers are starting to recognize that having differences in our cognitive processes can lead to better and different work outcomes.
Yeah, you see that some people we've considered in the past to be geniuses who've changed the world have also been, post-mortem have been diagnosed with these different conditions.
And I think they've always existed.
Because this idea of disability, I've always hated that word. I know that's now the common word versus handicap, but I've always kind of preferred handicap because it makes it sound like you have something that you can overcome. And in this case, maybe it is a skill or a way of looking at the world that could be harnessed as we progress. Is that where the thinking is going now, or is it more toward labeling?
I think that if I were to look at my daughters, my youngest is certainly disabled by her sensory processing and by her lack of impulse control. It becomes a hindrance to daily life. And to me, if you're going to say something is a disability, it has to be something that interferes with your daily activities
Right.
in a way that you can't easily accommodate.
Okay.
Schools could do more stretching. They could do more get up, walk around, move about, fidget. That's fine. But some of her impulse control leads her to make very poor decisions. If she's hungry, she'll just get in the pantry and eat. Well, she may not even actually be hungry. She has, she has that inability to recognize that she has eaten. She should be full. Let's take a break. She has trouble keeping track of time, just like I do and her sister does. And those are things that you need to learn to adapt to. Now, at the same time, she's outgoing, she's energetic, and yes, if you harness that energy, you could get great results. But schools aren't designed for that normally. Schools are designed for rows of desks and 45 minutes of this, 45 minutes of the next subject. So we're at that point now where I think the younger generation, those under 35 who are recent graduates of our medical and mental health systems, I think the recent graduates, the younger teachers, the younger nurse practitioners, younger doctors are doing a much better job. And I hope that as we see that generational change, that is also taken up by some of the older instructors and some of those of us who grew up with different labels, but maybe we can learn from our younger colleagues too how to adapt and accommodate.
Yeah, it's a brave new world out there. So how about the fact that a lot of people are now are calling themselves ADHD, having ADHD, like, I must have, I'm this, therefore I fall into that category too. Is there a lot of misdiagnosis among people who would be within the second standard deviation from the norm, wanting to be special in that way?
I struggle with this one because a diagnostic battery has more than just a label attached. For our youngest, we really struggled with some of her oppositional traits, that impulse control that leads her to argue with mom, dad, teacher. And a fourth grader is in a world where the fourth grade teacher doesn't understand every oppositional mood. A diagnostic label opens the door for medical treatment, medical interventions, and other things. At the same rate, I understand people self-identifying as I'm a little hyperactive, or I seem like I might be autistic. And I understand that testing is expensive. Not all insurance covers it. Not all schools do a great job screening. But at the same time, I tell college students and I tell young people, remember that our K-12 system must screen you. If your parent suspects ADHD, suspects autism spectrum, suspects PTSD for whatever reason, then you are qualified to at least be evaluated for an individualized education program or a 504 plan under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So our youngest will undergo her 3-year renewal in October. So she will be reevaluated and reassessed by her school. And that's a federal mandate in the United States. And most of the Western world has adopted a similar program. Some of it's 2 years, some it's 4 years. The US, it's 3 years. But every 3 years, your child, while they're in the public schools, can be assessed. So when people say, well, it's too expensive or it's not available, as long as you're in a public school, that's required in every state, in every territory in the United States. Same is true in Canada, Australia, and the UK. So that diagnostic label, it opens up opportunities for supports, reading support specialist, dyslexia specialist, We have really struggled with reading and writing for our youngest. That opens the door for those supports. So the label is more than just a label. A label is, unfortunately, it's the key to opening up these doors to opportunity. Now, for an adult, it's not uncommon for a dad or a mom, a sibling who's older to say, wow, little brother just got diagnosed. I'm a lot like little brother. Maybe I have this. Should I find out?
Right.
And that's why we're seeing more adults diagnosed, as more adults are becoming aware as their children are brought into this. Now, I was diagnosed before we had a family. But again, it was at 37 when these labels had changed, and I had particular struggles as a university student. And again, the label has some benefits. The question is, do those benefits justify what your insurance or your state aid or your college or K-12 system will allow? I know that my wife and I, we did make the decision to pay for some testing, and hopefully, that is something you can work out. I would like to see where we don't, instead of seeing self-diagnoses, where we see a system where under the Affordable Care Act or something else, where we include more mental health diagnoses. I believe that my parenting is better knowing that my labels are similar to my children's labels. So when I'm in an IEP meeting or I'm with a teacher, I can say, I am also ADHD. These are the things I struggle with. I also am diagnosed autistic. These are the social cues I miss. This is how I adapted socially. And so I think it's really important, at least for me as a parent, to be able to understand what my daughters might be going through. Now, I won't understand everything they go through, and they won't understand everything I go through, but it certainly gives me insights to say, I'm neurodiverse, they're neurodiverse. What would have helped me succeed? So if a parent's on the fence, one benefit to that diagnosis is going in then to the school system and the healthcare system saying, I have this, and I think my child does, or my child does. And so I want to advocate more from a more informed perspective.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, private schools, the classic private schools, are really ill-equipped to deal with people outside of the norm. So that if your child is diagnosed, or if you think that is a challenge, you should go to get help outside of a private school, or ask them for help. And you may need to go to either a public school to get help that is appropriate and affordable, or to a specialized private school that knows how to work with kids with neurodiversity.
And unfortunately, this is true, not just K-12, but even at the university levels. We see differences in supports. Unfortunately, the K-12 system right now has a teacher shortage. They also then have a very severe specialist shortage in reading specialists, language specialists, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, you name it. Schools right now don't have the individual. So even if they had the money, they don't have the personnel. What this has led to is parents of children with special needs looking for schools, school districts, looking for opportunities for your child. We've all done that. We've all considered, okay, are the schools where we live good?
Yeah.
And that's what parents do. And if you're middle class or upper middle class, you might even, as you're looking to move for a job, you might look at the school district. That's a standard thing to do.
Entirely left California because they couldn't get the right schools, affordable right schools in our area.
And what my wife and I have done here in Texas is Texas has charter schools. The charters do have to meet all of the state standards. They have to take the state exams, the STAR test. They have to publish those results. And because they are publicly funded, they have to meet the same requirements. But what happens is charter schools have started to specialize. So our youngest goes to a charter school that specializes in challenging students, behavior issues, academically behind, non-native speakers. So we searched out a school that had the supports that she needed. And then our oldest, who is twice exceptional, which means she's both on the spectrum as well as ADHD, but she's also gifted. We found a charter school for her that is a college prep academy, because what we found is when she's bored is when she can't control herself. So she needed a more demanding academic environment than what the public schools had. So unfortunately, both of our children now attend privately operated charter schools. And I teach at a state university, and I will tell you that our supports are not where they are at some of the private universities. So it really depends on the university or the K-12 system, what it's known for, who's in it. The great challenge for parents is you don't know if it's the K-12 public system that will meet your needs or if it's going to be private or charter unless you really talk to other parents. And unfortunately, we're in a time where parents don't connect as much. COVID did not help that. But, you know, for my wife and I, we had no way to know until we really researched which schools are appropriate for our special children. Every child's unique, and we just knew that our local K-12 was no longer meeting their needs effectively. This is one of the things I strongly encourage you is my wife and I go to these meetings together. And having been a teacher, working now at a university, being a university instructor, when I have students who are under 18, they're called dual enrollment. They get K-12 benefits, but they can take college courses. I see the same thing that I saw in the K-12s. The mothers are there. The mothers will handle the medical stuff. The mothers will handle the mental health things for the child under 18. And it's very rare that you see a father.
Yeah.
As where my wife and I both went to the meetings for our youngest.
I would think that if you have a disabled child, you even more than usual. I mean, you always should be on the same page, but then you really need to be on the same page because of very vast differences in opinions of treatment and paths. And
I think, and the unfortunate reality is that if there's two of you, that's a little bit better odds. When my wife and I went to the IEP meeting recently for the youngest, there's the principal, there's the special ed teacher, there's the homeroom teacher, there's the psychiatrist or psychologist, and then there's one or two parents. I think anytime it's just one parent, you run the risk of being overwhelmed. So at least if there are two of you, I know two and four isn't quite even, but it's better.
But when you say that, you mean like that in terms of like absorbing the information and understanding the whole system, or do you mean in terms of fighting against that system and advocating for your child to make sure you get the best?
It can be both. First of all, there's so much information that it's hard for one person to take notes and keep track of everything. We go in with a binder, we take our medical histories. When you go into this, it always helps to have someone who's very organized, who has a binder, who has notes on a phone or a tablet or a computer. We keep journals, we keep logs, we know what's going on. And when you're working with special education children, you tell the parents, be prepared for the meeting. Go in with your notes, go in with your areas of concern. Not everything can be a concern. They only want one or two things to work on at a time. But you need that. And one person cannot manage flipping through the notes, answering the questions, because they want these meetings to go quickly. They want this 45-minute meeting and done. And so I think having two people helps. The other thing is, whether you're a single father, single mother, however it is, they will talk over you and tell you what they're going to do. As where if there's two of you, you're more likely to be able to say, excuse us, we have a question. We, the two parents, have a question. If you're a single parent, you can get advocates. There are people from the Autism Society, there are people from the dyslexia groups who will go in and be an advocate with you. So you're not at least one person, but maybe you have that extra person. But as parenting, going in as a team is the way to do it. It's so much better to go in together.
Yeah. So you yourself are autistic and ADHD and have ADHD. Yet you've managed. You've got an MFA. You've got a doctorate of specialization. You teach at Texas A&M. Have you developed? Did you develop the coping strategies on your own, or did you get a lot of help and guidance to make these accomplishments that would seem to be difficult for others?
Oh, I would say that it's still a challenge. So for my oldest, what I'm telling her now are the things that I had to learn myself. So we watch and read a lot, definitely read a lot, and we talk about the characters and what are they feeling, what are they saying, what are they doing. We're currently watching Young Sheldon, which she can relate to. So it's one of those things, okay, why did Sheldon miss the joke? What was the joke? Do you understand what his grandmother is saying? And for me, it was always a struggle and still is. I'm not good at social situations. I frequently avoid them or leave early. And I tell my daughter openly, this has certainly affected my career.
Mhm.
Academia is based on conferences, publishing, being out there and getting known. That is very difficult for me. I would much rather be, I'm at home today. I'll be grading papers at home. I'm more comfortable, by myself with my computer, with my grading. The social aspects of any job will always be a challenge. So I'm trying to teach little things to my daughter. Say thank you to your music teacher after the lesson. Well, and her response is, well, the music teacher's supposed to teach me.
Yeah, as we pay her, right?
Yes, sweetie, but we still should say thank you. And so there are things that I had to learn that I'm trying to remind her that these are social cues that, maybe you and I don't understand them, but they're important to other people.
And so this is where I think it gets very confusing for a lot of people, because I'm sure there are people like I'm hearing you and thinking, I'm introverted too. I don't get my energy out of being in groups of people. I'd rather stay at home. I quite often don't understand some of the reasons for some of those social cues or the niceties, or I had to teach my own kids. You do say thank you, or you do open a door, or some of those obvious social rules that we kind of take for granted, but you have to teach the kids. So when is it that you realize that your child is more out of the mainstream than any child who just needs to be brought along and brought up to speed? They'll get over it, they'll grow into it, they'll mature, all those things that we usually say. But that there's something else going on and you have to take some extra steps.
The social impairments with the autism diagnosis are not something that can be easily dismissed. So it's more than just not being able to read facial expressions, or you occasionally miss someone being sarcastic. It is you never understand the sarcasm. You never read the face properly. It is it is more severe. You don't know, or you cannot you cannot mentally diagram the flowchart of human behavior.
Right.
Why people do the things they do just does not make sense to you. And the other thing is when you look at autistics, a lot of them have some of the other traits, which is, for example, extreme sensitivity. And I don't just mean mild sensitivity. I mean, right now, as we're talking, I'm in my office, I'm being, the fan is bothering me, but if I don't turn on the fan, it's 100 degrees here. Yeah. In Central Texas today. So I've got a fan on. Well, I can see that on my Zoom screen flickering, and the flicker is just driving me insane. It's little things. It's not just a little obsessive compulsive. It's things that literally start to hurt physically. There are colors that I'll see certain colors and they hurt. Riding the train became difficult for me because of the smells. We lived for 5 years in Minnesota. I tried to ride the public train. The smells, if someone was eating a bag of Doritos nearby, I wanted off the train. I'd rather walk. You're overwhelmed. Your senses are on overload. Autism, I think, is often misunderstood. It is not that the autistic wants to be alone or doesn't want these interactions. It's that the sensory processing is off, so it's so overwhelming. Little sounds can become big sounds. Little smells become big smells. It's not uncommon for an autistic to have synesthesia, where you see color or you see music, you see and smell things that other people don't see and smell, and that you can't explain to them, what do you mean you hear the color yellow?
Yeah, I've heard that. That's amazing. Yeah.
How in the world can you hear a color? Why is it causing buzzing in your ears? And so there are comorbidities like that it's very difficult to explain to someone, that there are tiny things that you ignore that for whatever reason, not only can I not ignore, but they're magnified 1,000 times.
Yeah. Like I can't stand the sound of other people chewing. And I know that I'll go out of the room, but I don't think I'm far enough out in the spectrum that I would have the same problem that you're explaining, where it's not just one of those once in a while. It's like all the time, all those things, and constantly.
And for a parent, this becomes a real issue. Other parents will, maybe they wonder why my oldest doesn't like to be hugged, doesn't like to be touched, she doesn't want to shake hands. That touch for her is overwhelming. It's not just that she's shy, it's that she does not like the sensation. It's not that she's a germaphobe or that she has OCD. She really doesn't like the sensation. And she doesn't like certain clothes, right? Everyone complains about tags and shirts. The tagless shirt is a great invention. But for an autistic child, it might be so overwhelming that they just strip off the shirt, or they remove the socks, or it's a very common complaint among caregivers that, well, your child keeps taking off his shoes and socks. Mm-hmm. Well, there might be a seam in the socks. There might be something that's bothering the child. And especially with nonverbal autistics, how are you ever going to find out? Wow. So you have to observe and pay attention. Food aversion is very common in autism because of the senses being heightened, they feel safe with a certain select palette of foods, and that's what they keep going to. And again, it's not that they're picky eaters, it's that they really don't like the texture or the smell or whatever. And again, being the parent, I can sometimes say, I understand, as where my wife might be, wait, she's just being picky.
Right.
No, there's something about that food that is triggering something that she can't explain.
Wow. Yeah. So, and does it manifest itself in some kids as aggressiveness or arrogance, or like seeming that they seem to think that they're the center of the world, versus the other side, which would be like they try to remove themselves and try to stay away from interaction?
I think a lot of it can be attributed to misunderstanding the autistic traits, and yet at the same time, I have very little patience for silliness, absurdity around me. I am one of those people that will just say something is silly or stupid. Why do I have to fill out 4 forms for my next school semester and fill them out in triplicate? Why isn't there one online place I go, say, these are my classes, and I'm done, and I hit submit? Why do I have to do this 4 and 5 times? And I will get so frustrated that I'll quit. I was just like, this is stupid. I'm done. My wife has to remind me, no, you have to fill this out. It's like, how many times do I have to upload the same information? And so for me, it becomes an intolerance for the repetition. I'm like, I did this. Why do I have to do it again? So when something seems illogical, it can seem like I'm being aloof, or that I'm being unreasonable, but it's really just the frustration of I had to do this, now I have to do it again and again. And I tell people it's one thing, like you go to the doctor and they have you fill out a form saying all the things that you're allergic to, not allergic to, whatever. You hand it over to the nurse. The doctor comes in and asks you the same questions.
Sure.
Did you not read the form?
Yeah. Why'd I do
Why
that?
did I fill this out? Except it magnifies, hundreds of times when you're in school or you're in some of these workplaces where it's like, I had to do I lost track. I had to do my CV at least 5 times this year. Under Texas law, your CV has to be on a front-facing portal managed by the university. The department wants your CV within the department portal. And because I was now teaching in English, English now has to have it. And then personnel wants your CV so they can do a background check, make sure your degrees are appropriate for what you're teaching. And it's just like, wait, can't I just upload it once? HR gives it to whoever needs it. So what happens is the autistic becomes overwhelmed with what seems like this frustratingly illogical system. And for me, that triggers the meltdown of, I'm done. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not going to keep fighting the online system or the whatever system, and I'm walking away. And it's not aloofness. It is just exhaustion of having to, I cannot separate myself from what feels like stupidity. And
plenty of that around.
yeah, and so it's something that I'm trying to work with and have for my whole life. But there are points where it does get confused. The other thing is because you're so concrete and direct that if someone asks me a question or my daughter a question, they're going to get an answer. And that isn't that the autistic's trying to be rude or the person with ADHD is trying to be rude or a learning disability or PTSD. The neurodivergent brain with that left frontal lobe difference is likely to just answer and then consider the consequences.
Mm-hmm. So
if someone asks, how are you doing? I may say, not well today. Well, so I have to run through my little matrix of what to say and what not to say. And I'm doing that with my oldest, and the youngest is too immature she's not there yet. But as she gets older, I hope to run her through, okay, in these situations, this is the response you give. And I know my oldest is going to say, but that's lying.
Yeah.
But again, as a father, I want my children to succeed and I want them to have a great life and I want them to not hit the barriers that I encountered.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think no matter how much I try, they're still going to make many of the same mistakes.
Or different ones that you didn't have, but yeah. Yeah.
Because neurodiversity, it's not going to suddenly, my daughter's not going to be able to suddenly engage her left frontal lobe executive function perfectly. There will be times when she will say something and she means it and she doesn't understand that it's offensive.
Right.
And so I am very fortunate I am able to navigate well enough to be employed. Mm-hmm. And I point out to people, I'm not tenure track. I don't interview well. But the university also knows that when they had an overload class, can someone teach 5 sections this semester, that I'll do it. And I'll teach. Teaching for me is good. Because you're in front of the students. It's not a one-on-one interaction. And even when it is in small groups, it's still me dealing with a subject. Mm-hmm. And the students will even say, gee, Dr. Wyatt, if we try to talk football or something with you, you look dazed and confused. I'm very dazed and confused. Yes. I was joking with one of my students. She knows that my youngest likes basketball or is playing basketball. And I said, I know none of the rules. I'm there to cheer her on. It's like, well, but aren't you supposed to learn the rules and kind of support your daughter? I'm like, she knows I'm there. I'll cheer for her, but there's no way I'm going to figure this game out. It's organized chaos. So I think being honest that I have limitations and those adaptations I've made help me get to this point and have a job, but I am not where someone who's better with people would be. I'm not at conferences, going on tour. When I speak to groups, I'll frequently speak and okay, I'm done, goodbye.
Yeah.
I don't always remember stick around, mingle. Those are difficult for me.
At the same time, you're among what, the top 1% of educated people in the United States, and you're totally doing great, which is a great testimony to how you can overcome some of these challenges if you've got.
I think that parents also, it's easy for us to compete. We want our children to compete, be the best, be the top, do this, do that. I know, I had a discussion with my classes yesterday. I know that I am not the expert they are in certain fields of math, engineering, biomedicine. I am not an A&M animal sciences professor. I don't know what they're studying in those fields.
Mm-hmm.
And I am blunt with them too. And one of them asked, well, do you have what's your knowledge really of English? I told them I do not have APA and MLA style memorized, and I don't know a lot of that stuff. I know to look it up. Mm-hmm. What I can tell you about is what I know in my fields. And I think that humility is something that parents need. We can't compete to be perfect, and we can't have our children competing to be perfect. And so the approach I take with my oldest is, no, dad's not perfect. Dad does not know everything, and you don't need to be a straight A student. Do your best.
Yeah, well, those are good. That's good to say to any child. Well, this has really been very interesting for me, just understanding a lot more about this issue and your challenges and the way you've framed a lot of these things. I think there are a lot of lessons in here about knowing your child, trying to look at this, trying to understand your child at an early age so you can get them the help that they need, but understanding how they are divergent in these different ways, which could manifest itself in a myriad of other ways. You have groups on Facebook and Twitter. If you search for the Autistic Me on Facebook or on Twitter, you'll find your links.
Yes, and podcast, Perspectives on Neurodiversity. The podcast, I've had guests like Temple Grandin and other scholars who specialize in autism, but also just parents, because I think it's so important to hear what another father's going through, what another mother's going through. What do we do when we're not medical experts, or I'm certainly not a psychiatrist. A lot of times parenting is overwhelming enough, and then you have a special needs child asking for help. So Perspectives on Neurodiversity, the podcast, a lot of times it's just saying, this is hard.
Yeah.
That's it's hard. Yeah.
Continuing to advocate for your child.
Yeah. And sometimes that's what fathers need to hear is it's hard, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed, and it's okay to say, dad's tired. Dad has no clue what he's doing. But dad'll do his best for you. Right.
That's all we can do. Well, Christopher, really a pleasure talking with you today. I'd really urge anybody to listen to your podcast. I did not know about that, so I'm going to have to check that out, because it is a subject that that affects some other people in my family who have been diagnosed, and I have not understood it as well as I should be. I hope I've handled it with the appropriate amount of attempted empathy, but without a lot of understanding. So thank you again for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So it's Paul Bance at GreatDad.com. Appreciate you being here, and keep on trying to be the best dad you can be. But as Christopher says, you can all just do the best you can. You don't have to seek perfection. Until next time, take care.